Chris Olivares with DPS. He is going to tell us a little bit more about what he's learned that happened out here at Robb Elementary today. And Lieutenant Olivares, we've just learned that 18 students have been killed.
Right, Vanessa. So first I want to acknowledge the brave men and women of law enforcement that showed up to the scene, that actually were involved in the scene, that actually made entry into this school and saved more lives. That, of course, we lost 18. But I want to praise those brave men and women of law enforcement. Also, offer our condolences on behalf of Texas Department of Public Safety to the families, to the victims, and the entire Uvalde community. We had, of course, as I mentioned, brave law enforcement made entry into that school, exchanged gunfire with a suspect who was wearing body armor. Several police officers were shot. At that point, we did have a tactical law enforcement team arrive on scene. They made entry. They were also met with gunfire by the suspect, but they were actually able to shoot the suspect, and now the suspect is deceased.
His way in. Once he's inside the school, what happens?
Right, so we had local police officers here from the Uvalde Police Department, school police officers, as well as state troopers that were responded on scene first. They were the primary officers on scene. They heard the gunfire. They saw the shooter. At that point, they were met with gunfire by the shooter. Several police officers were shot. Wow. At that point, the gunman, the shooter, was able to make entry into a classroom, barricaded himself, and at that point, it just started shooting children and teachers that were inside that classroom, having no regard for human life. Just a complete tragedy, and an evil person going into this school and killing children for no reason whatsoever.
How was law enforcement eventually able to breach that classroom and take out the shooter?
Right, so at that point, the initial officers that were on scene, they were at a point of disadvantage. There was no way they were able to make entry, especially with the amount of manpower that was on scene. So at that point, their primary focus was to evacuate as many children as possible. Teachers that were breaking windows around the school trying to evacuate children to prevent any further loss of life. But again, they kept hearing the gunfire as they were doing this, as they were performing these rescues. We had a specialized tactical law enforcement team arrive, comprised of federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, state law enforcement, that were able to make forcible entry into that classroom. And just goes to show you that placing their own lives between the shooter and those children to try to prevent any further loss of life. As they entered that classroom, one of those officers was met with gunfire. He was hit, he was shot. He is out of the hospital. And at that point, they were able to shoot and kill the shooter and prevent any further loss of life.
It's so scary to think this could have been even worse than what it was. So that's the how. What about the why? What do we know at this hour? The shooter killed